president should put an overhaul on all of it. Like there should be an overhaul. He should not accept it to go the way it is. The budgeting process, let him be the first person to ever reject a budgeting process and let it be redone again. It doesn't mean that a fiscal policy is a very contentious issue. Now, if it's done wrongly, these are going to continue and he'll not be able to stop it. So it's time he curbs this, and he can curb it because the bottom right now as we speak is stopping with him with his ascension. But this is the time he does not even need to listen to advisors. He needs to look at how things
are. Ruth alivyosema Danish kwamba mswada ukifika kwake aokoe vipi hali.
Aokoe, aurudishe. Let there be an overhaul, a change. Wacha isha ifanywe tena. Because right now hakuna kitu ina agree na ile ingine. Hakuna reconciliation kwa hiyo finance bill na hakuna reconciliation kwa wananchi. There has to be inclusion. Diversity, equity and inclusion. Those three, diversity, equity and inclusion. Kila mtu lazima asikie ameincludiwa. Watu wasikie wako there is equity both for the haves and have not. Now also diversity of Kenyans, because now we can see the young people who are 35 or more than 35% of this country do not even have jobs as much as they are.
Na labda atasikia kwa sababu pia ukiingia katika mitandao ya kijamii hivi sasa naona mtoto wake Shalin Ruto ameweza kutoa jumbe pale na kumzungumzia, na akasema yeye kama mtoto wa rais anaona kwamba babake labda atasikiza kwa sababu amekuwa katika uongozi miaka 30, na akasema kwamba hana shaka ama shauku kwa sababu anajua mzazi wake ambaye ndio rais ni msikivu na akona ari ya kutaka kufanya kazi kwa Wakenya. Unajua wanasema mzazi kwa mwanawe, mwana kwa mzazi. Kwa hivyo tunaomba pia amsikize. Na sijui pia inatoa picha gani, lakini labda mtatujuza baadaye. Kwa sababu tunafahamishwa kwamba katika kaunti ya Mombasa kufikia sasa maafisa waliojeruhiwa wamefikia 4. Na pia kuna picha mtandaoni ambayo imesambaa kuonyesha kuna mwanahabari mmoja ambaye ni wa kimataifa amepigwa risasi katikati ya jiji la Nairobi na ana majeraha makali sana. Ameonyesha maumivu akiingizwa katika gari ya ambulance kuweza kupata matibabu. Tutakuwa tunaipata taarifa hiyo kwa kina, lakini ripoti zinazotufikia hivi sasa ni kwamba maafisa 4 wa polisi wamepata majeraha katika kaunti ya Mombasa walipojaribu kuwazuia waandamanaji kuchukua barabara ya kuelekea ikulu ya Mombasa. Kisumu wameamka, Baringo wanaendelea, Eldoret tunaona nyayo za waandamanaji nipe kupe pale wakijaribu kutafuta njia za kutumia barabara zile kuonyesha ghadhabu zao. Lakini iwapo Mkenya anajiuliza kunani kinachoendelea, ni kwamba kila mwaka bajeti husomwa na bajeti hii huwa inasomwa mwezi wa 6 ili kufikia mwisho wake basi ianze kutumika mwaka wa kifedha utakaofuata ambao ni kuanzia Julai tarehe 1, au sio? Mwaka wa kifedha utakuwa umeanza mpya ambao ndio unaitwa mwaka wa 2024-25. Lakini kabla ya bajeti hii kutumika ambao ni bajeti ya trilioni 3.9 ilivyosomwa na Profesa Njuguna Ndung'u juzi tarehe 13 mwezi Juni, ni kwamba lazima kuwe na sheria, maana mambo mengi sana kubadilishwa pale ndani. Sheria ubadilishwa, ushuru na kadhalika. Sheria hii ambayo inakuja kuitwa Finance Act kwanza kabisa inakuja kama mswada, ndio inaitwa mswada wa fedha mwaka 2024 kumsaidia huyu Profesa Njuguna Ndung'u na Rais William Ruto kukata ushuru bila kuulizwa maswali. Mnasema tunalindwa na sheria. Na bajeti hii tukiangalia ni kwamba kulikuwa na pesa nyingi sana ambazo zinatumika Ruth katika matumizi ya kila siku, zaidi ya trilioni 2.7 zinakwenda kwa matumizi ya kila siku, wala mayai wakasema recurrent expenditure. Lakini pia maendeleo pale ni kama alipata tu 3.8 kama sija kusema ni bilioni kama 680 hivi ndio pesa leo. Na Wakenya wakajiuliza uliulizwa swali Danish kwamba mbona pesa hizi zote zitumike kulipa mishahara, kununua kaimati na vitobosha kama tunavyofanya hapa studioni siku ya leo, mbona pesa nyingi zisitumike katika maendeleo na kumwangalia Mkenya yuko wapi? Tatizo lilianza hapa kwa bajeti ama liko kwenye mswada wa fedha Danish?
Tatizo lenye liko ni kwamba nchi yetu we are captured by politics. Kwa sababu so for example rais akishinda uchaguzi akona watu wake ambao walimsaidia kushinda uchaguzi. Lazima wapate nini? Lazima wapate cheo fulani. Lazima waregeshe mkono, unajua. Lakini sasa hivyo if you want to lead a country lazima you go against the politics kwanza, kwa sababu there's no way sasa hivi tunaambiwa kwamba kuna CAS ambao wanatarajiwa kuappointiwa na watu karibu watakula bilioni nyingi sana za our money. So it's not the Finance Act that has a problem. Neither is it our budgeting that has a problem. Shida yetu iko kwenye siasa yetu. We have a siasa of what we call the politics of cronyism. Mimi namshika Lofty mkono, alafu Lofty akishanisaidia kupata kura kadhaa, alafu reward. It doesn't matter kama naweza afford Lofty ama siwezi afford. Sasa hivi mwana Dr. David ndiye ambaye ni one of the advisors wa serikali ametoa pay slip yake. Analipwa I think 45,000 consultation fee per hour. Tumeona pale analipwa about over 600,000 shillings per hour. I mean per year rather. Per month rather. Sasa if you are a president ambayo unaongoza nchi ambayo a huge percentage ya wale watu ambao ni vijana hawana kazi, hawana ajira. Alafu nchi bado the cost of living iko juu sana. Jamani, do you still need to employ more people? You don't need to employ more people. You just say enough.
Unasema rais hahitaji washauri. Washauri ni wananchi. Aje wasikize wanasema.
Achana watu wa Harvard na watu ambao wameenda shule kubwa hizo. Unajua kwa sababu sasa mimi nimeenda Ongeche ni shule, it's a very small school in the village. Labda mimi advice yangu inaweza cost president only a loaf of bread. Lakini advice yangu iko rooted kwenye community. Mimi naongea na wananchi kwa ground. Lakini sasa umechukua watu ambao Harvard International Schools, Stanford wapi na wapi, they have what we call contempt for the poor. Kwa sababu wanajua na kwamba ni elite na hao ndo dynasties. Alafu wale ambao walikuchagua hustlers, umesema sasa umewazimia simu. You no longer want to listen to hustlers, you only want to listen to elites whom you told us are not good for this country. That's why the problem.
Hapo ndo shida imeanzia. Na anavyosema Ruth, si rahisi sana tajiri. Mimi katika tajriba yangu kidogo tu ya kuwa tajiri na
toa payslip tuone unaingiza ngapi.
Watazama matajiri, nataka kumaanisha hivyo wakiishi ni kwamba si rahisi tajiri yakubali kufikiwa na maskini. Wawe na katika urari katika maisha.
Actually one of the biggest problem ya our country and most African country, the biggest divide is the haves and have not. Because haves, they continue looking down upon the haves. Bridging that gap. This is some of the reconciliation that the president need to save this country like now, you know.
Maana ndo ilikuwa injili yake
hiyo. This actually, no matter what's going on, this is his like prime moment when he now have to come and really save this country from many atrocities that have come out, I think since independence. Wacha tuseme hivyo. Hii mambo mingi imetoka mbali, you know. Yeah, and tax is not one of the issue. Actually, this was just a trigger, you know. Lakini as he has said, watu wa soft life hawawezi continue kuongoza hustlers. They will not understand.
Lakini unajua sasa swali ni hata hao mahasla pia wakipatiwa nafasi ya kuongoza inakuwa mabadiliko ya wananyafua tu.
I think processes, kwa sababu one of the things we've not seen is promises being fulfilled, and one of the things that has not happened in this country for the longest, corruption. Corruption has never been curbed, you know, as much as, and we normally hear that corruption is budgeted. So kwa hii budget labda we do not know at what extent corruption has been budgeted.
Nafikiri walitoa wanaazimio kinara huyu Raila Odinga na timu yake baada ya bajeti kusomwa leo. Kesho kina Kalonzo akajitokeza na kutoa taarifa kwamba tayari kuna bilioni kadhaa za ufisadi zimetengwa pale ndani kwamba zitaweza kutumika tu kufanyia ufisadi. Kwa hivyo Ruth anachokisema ni kana kwamba nafikiri kama trilioni 1.2 kama sijakosea, nitathibitisha hizo ni za kuchezea ufisadi. Kwa nini iwe hivi? Na ndio maana swali linajitokeza kwamba viongozi wengi wa Afrika kwa nini wafanye kampeni gani? Kampeni ambazo zinahitaji michango kutoka kwa watu ambao wanahitaji kulipwa, alivyosema Danish. Mbona zisiwe kampeni njaa? Kwamba mimi mnanipenda, nina sera ambazo zinaweza kusaidia taifa liende mbele, nipeni kura.
Lakini labda tunaelekea hapo.
Naomba nijibu kabla Ruth.
Naam.
Lofty Matambo, ni vigumu sana kuongoza nchi ambao watu wanaelewa na watu wana hela. Kwa sababu ukiona kila kukuwa na wanasiasa, haujaona wakiwa wanafanya campaign Karen, haujaona wakiwa wanafanya campaign Kituzuru, Runda na huku kote. Kwa sababu huko watu wa kupiga kura ni wachache sana. Lakini ukienda Donholm, ukienda Kayole, ukienda Mathare, Dandora, huko ndio watu wamejaa hivi. Sasa mwanasiasa mgani ataweza kutoa Runda akutoe Dandora akupeleke Runda na najua hapo atakuwa amelose kura. Sasa it's in their interest to keep us down. It's in their interest to keep us poor. Kwa sababu mtu ambaye ana tatizo la chakula, ukimpa shilingi 100 atakupigia kura. Mtu ambaye ana tatizo la school fees, ukimpa like 2,000 shillings, they will vote for you. And that's why they can do this budgeted corruption. Kwa sababu uchaguzi unaokuja this time round, kwa sababu ame lose ground in terms of kupendwa, they will have to buy their way. How do you buy your way? Unanunua wale watu ambao wana hesabu kura,
na wana hela,
wana inchi, alafu unanunua security apparatus, alafu hata kama umeshindwa, you can decide to get yourself sworn in at night. Ilivyofanyika.
Lakini kutokana na huu mwamko ambao tumeona hivi sasa ambapo vijana wanaangalia viongozi na kuangalia ni kazi gani ambayo mnaifanya. Je, mnajihisi kwamba ifikapo mwaka 2027 hilo la kununuliwa litaisha ama litapungua? Litaisha,
lakini litapungua kwa sababu you can fool Waingereza wanasema hivi, you can fool some people sometime, but you can't fool everybody all the time. Wakenya wameamka. Na mimi I know for sure. Mimi ni mtu ambaye nimesoma history sana. Kuna nchi fulani inaitwa Cuba. Cuba kulikuwa na mfisadi mmoja sana alikuwa anaitwa President Baptiste. Alafu alikuwa na over 10,000 armed policemen. Alafu pia alikuwa anasupportiwa na jamaa fulani anaitwa Lewinsky ambaye alikuwa ana supply cocaine the entire region. Akina timu akina Fidel Castro na Che Guevara, watu wakinanga Che Guevara, Che Guevara alikuwa ni Argentina, lakini alikuwa ni daktari. Akaenda kusaidia nani? Akina Cuba pale hivyo. Wale na less than 500 people waliweza kufurusha Batista na akatoka na milioni kadhaa za dola na aka escape the country. That has happened even in the Tiananmen Square. Vitu kama hivi tumeona revolutions ziko zinafanyika in different parts of the world. You can beat people, but you can't beat the resolve in their heart. Every time unatumia baton, unatumia vitu wa machozi and all these things, unaweza kuweka resolve za watu kwa sababu hawa a few elites wanauliza tutakula nini kwa sababu wana options, pizza, burger. Unashika venye tuko na options hapa. Lakini Wakenya wengi wanauliza tutakula lini? Tutakula lini? Mtu ambaye anauliza atakula lini na mtu ambaye anauliza atakula nini, hao watu hawezi wakasikizana. Na huyu mtu eventually akipelekwa sana na njaa, itabidi amekula watu ambao wanajiuliza watakula nini. And that's the problem that the president.
Kwa hivyo itakuwa ni sheria ile ya mwituni sasa imeingia ya utakachopata wala hicho. Na nafikiri napenda sana historia aliyoitoa na ananikumbusha mwanafilosofia mmoja wa mageuzi pia ya vita, Niccolo Machiavelli, ambaye mwanafilosofia pia yeye anasema kwamba kuwa na mali, kuwa na nguvu zote na jeshi lote pamoja na mtoto wa bunduki ndio utaweza kutawala watu. Kwa hivyo mali pia ni kigezo kimoja cha kwamba tuwe nayo sisi hawa tuweze kuwanyonyora na kuwanyanyasa ili tuweze kuwaongoza. Ruth alivyozungumza ni kwamba nafikiri mwisho wa siku ni kwamba sasa hivi iwapo rais atakwenda na aweze kukataa mswada baada ya kupigwa kura, maana tunafuatilia na aseme siutaki, tutarudi vipi tena katika mfumo mzima ili wananchi wapate mswada ambao wanaona unawafaa?
Asante sana. First kama I was the advisor wake saizi, ningemwambia turudi kwanza kwa manifesto. Manifesto ni promises ambazo aliagiza wa Kenya na kuje from clarity ya kusema tumefika wapi. Wa Kenya because Kenyans saizi ni kudebate tuko wapi, because we are all over. Okay, this has never happened ever before, and inaonyesha we are at a different dispensation as a country. There has to be change. So akiweza aende aseme haita happen, irudishwe. Why am I saying that? By the time the first reading was being done 13th of May, hakuna mwana Kenya alikuwa aware. Kenyans were in their own business until the 13th of May, ambapo mswada ulisomwa. Public participation ilihapenika wapi na kina nani? Is it the same people? Mwenzangu hapa anasema labda wali pia hao wananunuliwa. That has to change. Can the budgeting process be redone, or it stand as a status quo where we were last year as issues get reconciled, because this is not going to change. Actually, this is only going to shape narrative ya 2027. Ita shape narrative. This can't be ignored. Why? Si lazima to demonstrate. Tutaingia Twitter spaces. Tutaingia the other places. Tutafanya campaign na mikutano kubwa huko, and people will make their own decision. And what makes this very different is that we are not saying that huyu ni Mjaluo na huyu ni Mtaveta na huyu ni Mkikuyu. Hiyo narrative imeisha. Ni the change that needs to be done very immediately, and that actually this is his time to really revolutionize and change. The other things that he has promised, like youth empowerment, something that has never happened in this country. This is actually this is the highest time. Now, one of the things it was supposed to encompass in this budget right now, ni youth.
Ruth, hebu shikilia hapo pacha wangu.
Na nataka tuelekee sasa katika majengo ya bunge ili tusiweze kukosa kinachojiri, kwa sababu tayari walikuwa washaanza kupiga ile kura. Angalau tusikie wamefikia wapi kufikia sasa.
Naam, tusikilizeni.
I vote no. Masara Peter Francis. I vote no. Lydia Aika Mnene. Abdullahi Amin Nadika. Hussein Abdi Bare. Buire John Okano. Buire John. Edward Kaunya.
I vote no.
Mary Amasa. Mary Amasa. Mwangi Geoffrey Wandeto. Murugara George. Mwangi Geoffrey Wandeto. Murugara George Gitonga. Mary Emasa. I vote yes. George Murugara. Susan Ngoge Nduyo. Susan Ngoge.
Susan, you can't shout. Give her the mic.
I vote no. Alice Wamboi Ngana.
Order. Rosabuyu. Order. 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 Honorable Junet, next time you give us your tellers, don't bring here tellers who are rowdy, like Kibageni. Go on. You do that again, Kibageni, and I'll disqualify you.
Nganga Alice Wamboi. William Kamket. William Kamket. Okay. Lawrence Mpuri Aburi. Mutunga John Kanyuidia. Julius Meli. Yes. John Murumba Shikati. Yes. Sioi Lilian Chebet. Sitienei Janet Jepkemoy. Sitienei, repeat again. Sitienei Janet. Absent. Cecilia Ngitit. Cecilia Ngitit. Absent. Joseph Namware Mother. Absent. Joseph Namware Mother. Nicholas Nyikor.
No, wait. Absent.
Nicholas Nyikor. Absent. Nabuin Paul Ekwam. Nicholas Nyikor. Paul Nabuin Ekwam. Namoit John Ariko.
I vote no.
Daniel Nanok Epuyo. Boss Gladys. Ochieng David Ouma. Ochieng David Ouma.
I need the mic. I vote no.
James Opio Wandai.
No.
Mark Nyamita. Ernest Kivai Kagesi.
Yes.
Adagala Beatrice. Adagala Beatrice.
Yes.
Okay. Kamisi Shome Habi.
I vote no.
Fatuma Abdi. Fatuma Abdi. Fatuma Abdi Jeho.
Na mtazamaji, ni upigaji kura ambao unaendelea. Awali spika wa bunge Moses Wetangula alikuwa amesema wangekubali kutumia njia ya kielektroniki, wangetumia muda wa takriban dakika 15 kuimaliza shughuli, lakini wakasema hamna. Wale viongozi bungeni, Opiyo Wandayi wa wachache pamoja na Kimani Uchungwa wa wengi, wameshauriana na spika na wakasema tupigeni kura kwa njia ya muonekano, kila mtu akisema la yake iwe la na ndio yake iwe ndio, kwa kuondoa ule uvuguvugu bungeni. Ndio tunachoshuhudia, lakini pembezoni pale ni Mombasa, kaunti ya Mombasa, ambapo tumeona gari aina Mahindra, gari ambazo zilitia fora kabisa miaka ya 90 huko enzi za rais mwenda zake Daniel Toroitich arap Moi, zikitumiwa na polisi. Ila hapa ni mbele ya kituo cha polisi, sijajua ni kituo kipi, lakini tutakuwa tunajuzwa baadaye na mwanahabari wetu Kevin Mutai, tukishuhudia waandamanaji. Kuna mawe yalikuwa yamewekwa pale kulinda eneo lile, lakini kuna baadhi ya watu ambao ni raia, na pia tunaona polisi wakati maandamano haya yakiendelea katika maeneo mbalimbali. Mtazamaji, ni siku ambayo tunakuletea maandamano ya mswada wa fedha mwaka 2024 katika kaunti mbalimbali nchini Kenya. Wakati huo huo, upigaji kura wa mswada huu wa fedha ukiwa unaendelea bungeni. Awali tumekujuza kwamba mswada huu umepita katika awamu ya kwanza ya siku ya leo, ambapo umesoma kwa mara ya 3 na vile vipengee kuweza kujadiliwa ama kusomwa mbele yao na mwenyekiti wa kamati ya fedha Kuria Kimani, ambaye pia ni mbunge kule Molo, na kuelezea wazi kabisa hiki kipenge hiki kitamaanisha hivi, hiki kitamaanisha hivi, na wakapiga kura kusema wamevikubali na wakubali ule mswada jinsi ulivyo. Wanaazimio wakisema hatuna haja kuhusishwa, wacha tutapiga kura. Kwa hivyo kura zinaendelea na tutakuwa tunawajuza kura hizi zitafikia wapi. Lakini katika kaunti ya Nakuru bado hawajatoka kuonekana kwamba wametia nguvu za kutosha asubuhi kabla kuingia barabarani, na ndio tunawashuhudia hapo wakifanya maandamano haya ambayo yanaongozwa na vijana wa mrika wa chini pamoja na wanaharakati wengine wanaojitokeza. Awali tumeshuhudia kina mama wakijitokeza na kufanya maombi mbele ya kamera za NTV, wakilia kabisa machoni mwa Rais William Ruto kwamba tusikilize rais, ulikuja kwetu ukatuita mama mboga, tukafanya kila letu kukupigia kura, iweje leo tunateseka na watoto wetu nyumbani? Ndio kilio ambacho pia kimesikika kutoka kwa vijana wale barobaro ambao ndio wengi, zaidi ya 70% ya vijana wale wakiwa ni vijana hapa nchini Kenya, zaidi ya 40% wakiwa hawana ajira, hawanani kazi zao ni za vijungujiko kutoka mkononi hadi mdomoni. Wanasema hatuna hata kitu cha kuhifadhi na kudunduiza kwenye akaunti zetu, angalau na sisi kesho tuweze kuishi kama nyinyi viongozi wetu. Ndio kilio cha Wakenya, na kama tulivyotathmini awali ni kwamba maandamano haya yameondoka kutoka kwa msaada wa fedha ambao unafaa kufadhili utekelezwaji wa bajeti hii ya trilioni 3.9 yake Rais William Ruto, ikiwa ni bajeti ya pili, hadi kuwa maandamano ya maswala na hoja mbalimbali ambazo wananchi wa Kenya wanahisi kwamba zimewabana koo. Mtazamaji, tunavyozungumza hivi sasa ni kwamba hali hii ambayo inaangaziwa na vyombo vya kimataifa, vyombo vya habari vya kimataifa, pia imeleta mwamko na taswira tofauti ambayo ilishuhudiwa labda katika maeneo mengine ya bara la Afrika. Nazungumzia miaka 2010, 2011, 13 katika nchi za maeneo ya kaskazini mwa Afrika wakati wa Arab Spring, ambapo walijitokeza kwa halaiki vijana sawia na hawa kutumia mitandao yao ya Facebook na kadhalika kuleta mageuzi katika nchi zao mbalimbali ambazo zinaongozwa na demokrasia na mwongozo wa Kiarabu. Na wengi wakahoji kwamba je, mwamko huu pia huenda ukafikia viwango vile, lakini hilo ni swala la kusubiri na kuona na kutathmini. Ila kinachoendelea sasa ni kwamba Wakenya hawa wamesema hawatachoka hadi maandamano haya yaweze kusikika na kuzaa matunda. Lakini mtazamaji, cha kukujuza ni kwamba tumeshuhudia pia baadhi ya maafisa wakijeruhiwa katika kaunti ya Mombasa, na pia waandamanaji kadhaa hapa jijini Nairobi. Tumeshuhudia mmoja akianguka katika barabara ya Kenyatta karibu na jumba la Imenti, ambapo vile ameweza kuchukuliwa na kupata huduma za kwanza. Tukashuhudia pia mmoja ambaye aliumia na kupata jeraha la goti katika eneo la Mombasa. Nakuru pia kumeweza kuripotiwa mmoja ambaye anasemekana huenda kama amepata majeraha risasi. Hilo tutathibitisha katika muda usiokuwa mrefu, lakini hayo ndo matukio makuu ya siku ya leo. Awali mtazamaji, tumeshuhudia na nimepata picha za moja kwa moja kutoka kwa ripota wetu ambaye anashughulikia taarifa kutoka kaunti ya Kiambu na maeneo mengine lakini pia naona katika kaunti ya Tharaka Nithi, Alex Njeru ripota wetu ambaye anaturipotia kutoka kule ametoma picha kwamba kuna waandamanaji ambao wametoka katika mji wa Chuka kaunti ya Tharaka Nithi na wanaendelea kuendeleza maandamano ambayo walikuwa wakiyafanya pale jana. Wanaendeleza shughuli zao za kupaza sauti na kusema kwamba pia sisi tunaomba tuseme tusikike. Frida
Tieno ambao anatujuza mengi kutoka Voi anasema kwamba barabara ya Mombasa imeweza kufungwa, Mombasa Nairobi, waandamanaji wameweza kuifunga barabara hile. Na pia vile pia Ruth Samuel amegusia kwamba hizi ni duru ambazo zinaarifu kwamba yule mwandamanaji ambaye aliweza kupigwa risasi ni kama ameaga dunia, lakini ni swala ambalo atakuwa analifuatilia kwa kina angalau kupata udhibitisho kutoka kwa maafisa wa polisi. Alafu vile pia Fredrick Mwitiriri anasema hapa jijini Nairobi mambo yanazidi kuchacha kwa sababu waandamanaji wanaendelea sasa kukaribia majengo ya bunge. Hata pia Melita Ole Tenges ameweza kudhibitisha hilo, nikisema sasa wanaelekea karibu kabisa kufika katika majengo ya bunge, swala ambalo linazidi kuzua rapsha ya vuta ni kuvute baina ya maafisa wa polisi na hawa waandamanaji.
Maana pale walipofika ni katika kanisa lile la All Saints Cathedral, ambapo ndo wamejaribu kukabiliwa kwamba hampiti hapa, mmetoka mbali, lakini hapa ndo utakuwa mwisho wenu. Margaret Kimathi ripota wetu kutoka Nyeri anatujuza kwamba polisi wametumia vitoza machozi kuwatapanya na kuwatawanya waandamanaji wa kaunti ile ya Nyeri ambao wanapinga mswada wa fedha wa mwaka 2024. Eldoret wakiwa bado wanaendeleza mishemishe yao kati yao na polisi. Maana huu sasa si mchezo wa paka na panya kati ya polisi na waandamanaji, lakini mchezo wa nipe nikupe. Sijui kati ya michezo hiyo miwili ni upi ambao una heri.
Na huu wa nipe nikupe si wa raha tupate.
Huu ni mchezo wa huu ni mchezo ambao unaleta shari na kuondoa heri. Kwa hivyo katika hali ya kumalizia, labda Danish, ili tuweze kumpisha mwanahabari wetu wa lugha ya King'eng'e Simriti Vidyatri ambaye amefika tayari studioni, upande wa pili anapakwa poda ili aweze kujiunga nasi hapa. Kauli yako ya mwisho labda katika hali hii inayoendelea, unaona kutatoka heri, dawa ni hii ama vijana hawa watagonga nje siku ya leo?
Lofty, nilivyokuambia mimi ni mwanahistoria.
Naam.
mwaka wa 2002 tulisema yote yawezekana bila Moi. Kibaki akaingia uongozini with the highest percentage of votes at 65%. 3 years down the line 2005 kwa na chungwa na ndizi. Tukasema yote yawezekana bila Kibaki. 2007 tukakubali chungwa
tukakataa ndizi na ndizi kuna utamu.
Ndio. Alafu Kibaki akafanya nini? Akadismiss all the cabinets, lakini hiyo ndio ikafanya nini? Ika lead to the 2007 politics where there was a protest and a contest. And of course we don't want to go back there. What I want to tell the president is this, that you can be loved today, so loved dearly, but the difference between love and hate is so thin. And you may have been voted by the same people, but these very same people can vote you out. And remember, he won with 7.17 million votes. The second person came with 6.94 million votes, less than 200,000 votes. Na zaidi ya milioni 7 ya Wakenya wakupiga kura. Hautaki ghadhabu ya milioni 7 wakisema wewe Zakayo shuka.
Kumaanisha pia wewe kama mwanaharakati Danish unachukua usukani upi? Utarudi Nyando kuambia vijana wapige kura? Kwa sababu kitu kingine ambacho tumekuwa tukishuhudia ni kwamba vijana wanapiga kelele lakini ikifika pale debeni hawamo. Sasa
hivi Frida, nimetoka nyumbani kama tayari nimeanza mpangilio ya kufanya hamasisho ya what we call political education, not civic education. Tutakuwa tuna organize watu kwenye ward. Mimi tayari ward zangu nimezijua na we're going to go back home. Lakini pia what I'm going back home to tell them that it's not about party, it's about hunger. Kwa sababu kama watu wetu mpaka sasa hivi wanaweza kuona line up wakiomba chakula ama wakipewa food in a county that receives rain and has a very fertile land, then our leaders are failed. And this revolution will not just eat the national leaders, it will also go down. Na wale viongozi ambao wamekalia viti na they have not responded to the needs of the people.
Naambiwa kwamba Smriti hajaingia, kwa hivyo kimombo chako najua ni cha Harvard lakini kidogo cha Nyando. Utakiregesha Nyando hicho kimombo. Tukimalizia.
Umesema turudi katika manifesto.
Mimi ningetaka kwanza. Tuliona president akimil down akalia alipoambiwa ameshinda uchaguzi. Tunataka president aende kwa hiyo maombi saa hizi peke yake, hata si advisor. Aulize Mungu kwa Daudi, niende ama nisiende, nitarecover ama sitarecover. Amsikize mwenyewe, because we know our president is very emotional, na yeye ako na relationship na Mungu wake, because he inataka a lot of wisdom kutoka kwake, because he's not only a change to this country but a change to even the continent of Africa in terms of the decisions zenye atachukua leo ama towards this finance bill. Na ako supposed kujua it's not about the finance bill, it's about this country and it's about inclusion. Lazima kila mtu asikike ameingia ndani ya debe. Hapo kwa manifesto Frida, arudi kwa manifesto. Atuambie hizi promises zilikuwa za bure ama zile za common Kenyan mwenye anasemanga kitu akijua hatafanya. Those are some of the things that we need to understand. Tuambie tumefika hapa. Alafu kitu kingine si kunyamazia wa Kenya. Ashikilia wa Kenya tutembee sisi wote pamoja, kwa sababu hatuwezi kuwa wengine wanakimbia, wengine wananini na wengine wanaachwa nyuma wanakufa njaa. Hata hao wenye wako njaa washikwe, wale wanyonge washikiliwe, tusonge mbele pamoja. I want to reiterate watu wenye walikuwa parliament waliimba wimbo wa taifa. Watu amke, atuimbishe hiyo wimbo wa taifa. Amkeni, patriotism turudi hapo na tuwe pamoja.
Uwe wimbo wa kumaanisha.
Uwe wimbo wa kumaanisha.
Naam. Safi kabisa. Kabla ya kumalizia, naona muungano wa madaktari wa wanyama wametoa taarifa yao. The Kenya Veterinary Association wamesema kwamba wanakashifu na kupinga vikali matumizi ya farasi katika kupambana na waandamanaji ambao hawana hatia. Kwa hivyo maandamano haya sasa yamechukua nyenzo mbalimbali na wanapinga kabisa kwamba ni makosa maafisa wa polisi kutumia nguvu kupita kiasi, hasa kumtumia mnyama farasi kuwakabili waandamanaji ambao hawana hatia yoyote. Na kutoka kwetu hatuna la ziada, pacha wangu, ila kuweza kumalizia matangazo yetu haya kwa lugha ya Kiswahili. Baadaye atakuwa anaingia Smriti kwa lugha ya Kimombo. Lakini tumalize vipi? Tuasema maskini hana makuu, haja yake ni nafuu.
Maskini mtu kwao, ugeni si kitu chema.
Maskini hachagui apewa achopokea.
Maskini haokoti, akiokota kaiba.
Maskini hapiki kombe mpaka mwaka wa mavuno.
Maskini na mwanawe, tajiri na mali yake.
Maskini wa mali hayuko, ila maskini wa jambo na hoja.
Na idani Shadongo akasema jamani, tunakula lini na tunakula nini? Ndio mirengo miwili hapa ambayo inapigania mswada huu wa mwaka 2024. Siku zote niite Frida Mwaka, nitaitika.
Nami naitwa Lofty Matambo, nasema shukrani za dhati kwa kuwa nasi. NTV inaendelea kukupasha na kukujuza matukio na matokeo ya matukio kutoka maeneo mbalimbali. Tuendelee kutazama na kusikia anapoingia ya simreti muda si muda. Asante.
Kuna maji hawezi kwa maji hapa. Maji ndio hiyo yana release mkoa wote. Iko ready kwa imeongoza. Sasa hivi
Tuesday, the 25th of June, 2024, another historic day in Kenya's history, as Kenyans have come out in huge numbers protesting once again against the Finance Bill 2024. Thanks for staying with us on this continuing coverage of the developments that are taking place throughout the day. I'm Smriti Vidyarthi, coming to you live from the Nation Center in the heart of the capital city in Nairobi, where right outside this building, tens of people have gathered, hoping to make their way to Parliament. We'll bring you the sights and sounds in just a moment, but first, let us take you to our colleague Melita Oletenges. Melita, tell us exactly where you are at this moment and what is happening where you are.
Well, Smriti, if you can hear me clearly, I am wanting because just a few minutes ago, we were running away from protesters who have finally managed to access Parliament Road. through City Hall Highway, where they had pressed for the better part of the afternoon. And as we're speaking right now, Smriti, I'm at the entrance that leads directly into the Parliament building. And what I am witnessing here is that hundreds, if not in the thousands of protesters have actually managed to access this road, and they are marching to Parliament. And we are going to be running a bit now. But police officers have been trying to push back, but their efforts have proven futile because the protesters have been hurling stones towards them. And this has pushed the police officers together with their machinery. I'm speaking about the water cannons alongside the vehicles that are used by the police officers. They have been pushed back to Parliament, and outside Parliament also, journalists who have gathered outside Parliament are also being pushed back. Now, Smithy, why this has proven to be a difficult task for police is because protesters away from different roads in the city, protesters from Uhuru Highway and also from City Hall Highway and even GPO, and we have seen that build up since early morning, despite the fact that there has been different efforts by police officers to make sure that they don't get to Parliament. That has been actually overcome by the protesters, and they are here outside Parliament, the Sinzi here. We can see also members, just let me get a clear picture of that, Mickey, just stay with me. I can see outside Parliament building, actually members of Parliament are outside here, are gathered actually. In between them is the police officers, and on the other hand, are protesters who are now approaching Parliament buildings. Earlier on, Smithy, we had a gunshot actually fired from inside Parliament buildings. We are yet to confirm, but we saw GSU officers, even police officers, just trying to shield the Parliament building from the protesters. But the protesters are actually making their way here, and it is a mixed event here because we have members of Parliament standing right outside Parliament, we have police officers in their numbers are trying to make sure that even as protesters advance towards Parliament, they will not access the main building itself. So, Smithy, those are things, as I said earlier, this has been a build-up from early morning. We are getting reports that the gunshots fired actually have injured a number of protesters. We get these pictures and also reports from sources, but we are yet to confirm. That from authorities, of course, will do due diligence to get the numbers of those who have been injured. We also getting reports of an injured journalist belonging to a journalist to the AFP who was injured. Reports indicated that he was injured during the protest. Police officers now, I can see from where I'm standing, I'm just outside the Parliament roundabout just to paint you a picture. And from where I stand, just the stretch that leads to City Hall Way. And you can imagine protesters are yonder just from where we are standing, but police officers are also standing on this other side. And it has been quite an engagement, running battles in town, echoes of blast of tear gas canisters, as well as the fumes that have rendered the town. And here we have been seeing also protesters employing new strategies just to ensure that they push back the police officers, because from early morning we could see a retaliation, not just returning the tear gas canisters that have been lobbed towards them, but also actually pelting of stones, of stones. We overpowered police officers outside Supreme Court and outside City Hall. And just about 2 hours from that, here we are now outside Parliament. This is Parliament Road, and the scenes you can see there. If my camera person, Dixon Onyango, is showing you those pictures, this is right outside Parliament, and protesters are engaging police officers who are trying to make sure that they don't go any further. But really, they are standing just about 200 meters from the Parliament entrance. And it is safe to say that what they wanted to achieve is nearly actually what they're going to achieve. So I can hear a number of gunshots, Richie, gunshots from police officers here trying to disperse protesters who are still forging forward and relentless. And right at that roundabout where they are standing and have converged is where the different roads meet. The road from Uhuru Highway just outside and the road that leads all the way. You can see the protesters running, and actually a retaliation trying to return. The tear gas canisters that have been lobbed. Police are advancing now towards the protesters' side, and excuse me, they're advancing towards the protesters' side now, and there has been a bit of reinforcement here because police officers who are previously in different parts of the city have now been called to, excuse me, part of me, but there has been a reinforcement here by police officers. Different contingents have been marshaled here to ensure that the protesters don't have the way to Parliament. As I said earlier, on the other end of Parliament, members of Parliament have gathered outside. Some members of Parliament have gathered outside, trying, or rather, waiting for the protesters. I might be forced to catch my breath here. Over to you, Rich.
Melita, we really appreciate that update from you, despite being so breathless after having run to help us get these shots and to bring us up to date with what is happening there. As you catch your breath,
Unaenda wapi sasa bwana? Wewe. Wewe mtoto wangu.
Watu wasikiri sasa. Sasa ni jumla. Wameingia ndani. Wameingia. Madam. Wameingia. Wewe chungwa, mnakimbia. Chunga ipo wapi? Umeingia. Imani kuja tumalize. You cannot stop them. Leo tuna hashtag choma manyumba za MP. Choma manyumba za MP. Tunakujia makwani. Tunajua hadi kwa manyumba zenu. Hashtag choma manyumba za MP. Tunapiga yepo. Ndio. Haya, washapika. Si umeona? Ndio hiyo, sinakwambia. Diawa ameingia.
Wameingia.
Madama, as much as you are they are now in parliament. They are inside parliament. Yes. Hey. We are the power. We have lost the fear. We have lost the fear. We have lost the fear.
Finance bill. My mother is a cop. I ran my own startup and will not kill it because of punitive finance bill. My mother is a cop and you will not kill my father. You will not kill me with your punitive finance bill. Tunangangana majama. Tumengangana majama. And it is here. It is here. Mimi ningangane nilale njani amke saa 9 kufanya kazi ndio ngombe ya mtu ikule pesa yangu. Mimi niamke nifanye kazi mtu aje ale pesa zangu. Nendea kuna wengine kule, give them coverage. Give the rest of the people coverage. Give them coverage.
You can't kill all of us! 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 Babysitters, mmelipa mrecord wapi? Ina blink iko sawa, bado iko na moto. Halo. Niaje? Sema. Niko tao, niko parliament. Hapana, pia. Baya. Haya. Jamaa, mnangoja gari.
And we start this hour in Kenya, where the security forces have clashed with hundreds of protesters opposed to tax hikes put forward by the government. Riot police, some on horseback, have been deployed in the capital, Nairobi, and have fired tear gas in an effort to disperse the demonstrators. The Parliament buildings have been cordoned off ahead of the vote by MPs on the controversial finance bill later today. Many fear the tax cuts will worsen a cost of living crisis. Protests are also taking place in the Indian Ocean port of Mombasa and other cities. More than 300 people were arrested earlier this week following similar demonstrations. A little earlier, I spoke to our senior Africa correspondent, Anne Soy.
I'm just standing outside Parliament where that debate has been going on this controversial finance bill. I can hear tear gas being lobbed in all directions. The young people have come out in large numbers. They have gone to different streets and the police are trying to keep them away from here. This is the ultimate goal. They want to come here and occupy Parliament, but they're not being allowed to do that. You can see the cordon here. And they're saying that they want the bill that is being debated in Parliament to be rejected in its entirety. They disagree with many of the clauses there. On Tuesday, the government announced that it was announced concessions on a number of the controversial clauses, including 16% value-added tax on bread, motor vehicle levies, and other taxes. But they say that is not enough. And that's the message that they're trying to pass here. They have been mobilizing and reaching out to them MPs, asking them to reject the finance bill. So that debate is going on here. They don't have a lot of time for that because they were hoping that they would pass this bill by next week so that come July, they'll have a law in place to be able to spend, to carry out government spending. So today, the protests are more widespread across the city and in different towns across the country, including the president's own hometown of Eldoret in Western Kenya.
Yeah, and it's a good point, that, isn't it? Although we're looking at the demonstrations, we're just seeing water cannons being used actually against demonstrators. But these are not just solely in Nairobi, they are elsewhere.
That's right. They're in different towns across the country. Yesterday, they were in the coastal city of Mombasa. And really, what is different about these protests is that it is young people in their 20s. I have, spoken to some teenagers who have come out, and they are so educated about tax issues, and they are debating this, and they're saying, we don't want this, we don't want this. And they're saying that, they have to be hard by government. This is not led by politicians. In fact, they have asked politicians to stay away and come to Parliament to debate those issues and shoot it down before Parliament. And therefore, this is something new in the country. They have been mobilizing on social media, on TikTok and Twitter and other platforms. And they're saying that they will not back down.
And that was our Africa correspondent, Anne Soy, talking to me in the last hour. We will, of course, keep across the developing situation in Nairobi, Kenya.
And to Kenya, where the unpopular finance bill has passed a significant hurdle on its way to becoming law after Parliament voted it through on its second reading. The proposed changes would mean tax increases for lots of people who are already struggling with the cost of living. Thousands of young people have taken to the streets to oppose it.
A new generation of Kenyans occupy the streets of the capital, Nairobi, as anger mounts over a controversial finance bill. Anti-riot police use water cannon and tear gas in an attempt to disperse protesters. The government continues to push the budget through Parliament, but they were forced to drop some of the most contentious elements, including a 16% tax on bread and an annual tax on car ownership. Despite government concessions, the swell of opposition that started on TikTok has spread to streets across the country.
I'm out today because I think this government has decided that they own this country. They don't own this country. We actually own Kenya. And I think that's what they're forgetting. So we are just here to remind them that Kenya belongs to all of us.
We want to stand out for ourselves. We as the Gen Z, we want to determine how our future will be ruled by we ourselves, the Gen Z. We are not here ready to be manipulated by the so-called President of the Republic of Kenya, Mr. William Samoei Ruto.
And there are calls for the president to resign.
Ruto must go. Ruto must go. Ruto must go. Ruto must go.
Ruto go.
Order, honorable member.
Lawmakers passed the bill's second reading on Thursday. The legislation is now almost certain to become law, but protesters say they won't back down.
Well, I asked our correspondent in Nairobi, Felix Marenga, why lawmakers had decided to advance the bill despite the outcry.
So some of the members of parliament who were in support of the bill have said that the government needs money and the government needs a working budget, and that's why they had to pass the budget. Then speaking during the day, President William Ruto asked members of parliament affiliated to the ruling party to expedite the process and pass the bill so that he can assent to it for it to become law. Then thirdly, members of parliament have shown clearly that they do not listen to their core constituents who voted them in. So it will be an interesting tussle to see what happens, because people told their members of parliament who are their elected representatives not to vote, but they've gone ahead to vote. So it will be a good tussle to see what happens in the coming days.
And explain to us why young people are particularly angry about these changes.
Young people are angry at the high cost of living. The cost of living, they say, has been blowing through the roof, and they say it's become unbearable. Majority of the young people are unemployed, and so many of them are learned and unemployed, and they feel that by the government continuing to tax them even more, even the basic items are becoming too expensive. Then the government has also proposed eco-levy on imported finished products. Some of the products like sanitary towels and diapers, and people feel that this should be a no-go zone for the government. Lastly, young people are also tired because they feel there's been a lot of runaway corruption by the government, and they're saying that instead of the government continuing to tax them more, they need to first deal with the runaway corruption before even thinking about taxing Kenyans even more.
Okay, so this law has passed 2 readings. What happens next, and what happens to the protests?
So what happens next is that there is one more reading that is set to happen early next week, that is on Tuesday. Then after that, the law will be assented by the president and it will now become an act. So it will take effect. Ideally, the government year in Kenya ends on 30th June and the other one begins almost immediately on 1st of July. So that is what will happen. But for the protesters, they say that because they've heard that the government doesn't seem to listen to them, doesn't seem to listen to their pleas, the protesters have vowed to remain on the streets. Some of them, in fact, earlier today were saying Ruto must go, saying that now, if it will get to that particular point, then they will not vote for the president again come 2027. Some of the members of parliament who voted yes to the bill have also been put on notice. They are voters saying that come 2027, they will meet at the ballot. And people online have actually started sharing the names and phone numbers of the members of parliament who voted yes to the bill, and they're saying that now it will be the masses versus the elected representatives. So it will be interesting to see how the next couple of days pan out and whether the protesters will remain on the streets as they have promised today.
Okay, thanks, Felix. Felix Marenga in Nairobi.
Widespread protests in Kenya against proposed new taxes. Police criticised for using excessive force. Many on the streets are young, mobilised by social media. Why is the government pushing the new taxes? And why has there been such a reaction? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Fierce protests across Kenya, violent crackdown by police, and the worst unrest since President William Ruto came to power less than 2 years ago. It was all triggered by government efforts to increase taxes to help cut the national debt and pay back its lenders, including China and the International Monetary Fund. Young people have led the protests, with social media prominent too. Police have used gunfire on peaceful protests, with fatalities, injuries, and mass arrests condemned by civil liberties groups. The government has offered some concessions, but it hasn't eased the tension. So why has this bill brought so much anger, and what are the wider implications? We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Laura Khan.
Undeterred by clouds of choking tear gas, these young Kenyans are taking to the streets in their thousands with a clear demand. They oppose the government's plan to raise $2.7 billion in additional taxes, under pressure from the International Monetary Fund. The protest, dubbed Occupied Parliament, started in Nairobi on Tuesday and have since spread nationwide.
This bill, we can't let it pass. We want to reject it completely, and that's why we are here. It's our duty to protest against the bill.
Kenya is lived by poverty. We have no education. Most of our people are unlearned. They cannot write, they cannot read. And the government still wants to pull away the budget.
Roads around Parliament were sealed, with both the noise and the message seemingly not reaching politicians. They held a second reading of the bill on Tuesday, but not all agreed.
This bill was a disaster. This bill is assuming that the Kenyans' tax rate should move to a higher rate regime.
President William Ruto had made amendments to the bill, dropping levies on bread, transport of sugar, financial services and motor vehicle tax, proposing instead to increase fuel prices. The new budget is a response to the IMF, which has called the government to increase revenues to reduce its reliance on borrowing. But with high unemployment, inflation, and a third of the country living in poverty, many see these additional taxes as punishing the poor. And the way police handled the protests may have worsened the anger on the streets. Gillian Munyeo says her son was shot dead while fleeing from tear gas.
If someone is fighting for their rights, why use live bullets? If he would have been found with any weapons, he would have said there is a problem, but he was walking with his friend.
Rights groups who attended Thursday's protests say spent cartridges implied the use of live rounds.
It's really shocking to learn that we are living in a country where youth are losing their lives for merely exercising their constitutional rights.
But nothing appears to deter these young Kenyans, who say they will remain on the streets until the government scraps its controversial plans to raise taxes. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's take a closer look at some of the items the new taxes will cover. Most of it will apply to imported goods, including phones, computers, motorcycles, which are a common form of transport. Value-added tax will also be doubled on petroleum products from 8 to 16%. Kenya is heavily reliant on diesel for transport and agriculture. But the government has dropped additional taxes on several items, including bread, sugar, and vegetable oil. Proposed levies on sanitary products and diapers were also dropped. Let's bring in our guests. In Nairobi, Stella Agara, a tax justice activist, an Africa governance and security analyst. In London, Reginald Kadzutu, a finance economist at Oxford Brookes University. And also in Nairobi, Nicodemus Minde, a researcher with the East Africa Peace and Security Governance Program at the Institute for Security Studies. A very warm welcome to each of you. And before we start, I would like to mention that we reached out to the Kenyan government and figures in Kenya who support its finance bill, but no one was available to join us on the program. Nicodemus Minde, I'd like to start with you in Nairobi. There is so much to unpack in this program, but before we get to some of the finer points, for our international audience, why is Kenya in this situation today?
Well, this is part of a bill that was introduced in Parliament in May, the finance bill, which is supplementary to the budget proposed for the year 2024-2025, and in it introduces a number of recommendations, especially on taxes and revisions on taxes, especially on VAT, excess duty, as well as withholding tax. And as the report has mentioned, this has actually led to a lot of disapproval by many of the Kenyan citizens because it targets, the essential commodities and products, which has really impacted the lives of the people because of increased taxation. And it is also part of an increased tax burden on Kenyan citizens, especially it came at a time when the previous finance bill of 2023 also introduced a housing levy, which has also compounded to the greater tax burden and, of course, the difficult in terms of living standards of the people.
Mr. Kadzutu, as Mr. Minde mentioned, there have been a number of taxes that have been already imposed on the Kenyan people. How is it that the government decided what to tax in its effort to raise revenues, in its latest efforts?
From an economic perspective, if you want to widen a tax base where you have not widened the income base, you have to move away from direct taxes. So if you look at the previous regime and the Ruto regime and the first part of the Ruto regime, they were mainly targeting PAYE, corporate tax, and the salaried employees. But you can only get as much from them. So for their unsatisfiable hunger for generating revenue, made them now to start going for indirect taxes, because that's an easier way of just widening the tax base, because it affects everyone. So when you start taxing bread, edible oil, fuel, and all, that means you go to every individual, because as long as you consume, then you will pay tax. It is said for those on the bottom of the pyramid, but also even said for even those who have an income, because then you are paying PAYE, then you still go pay a consumption tax on top of your salary that has already been taxed. So the reason why they have gone now for indirect taxes or taxes on consumption is that they've realized you can't widen the tax base with those who are salaried, so they're trying to go for everyone.
Okay. And Ms. Agara, what is it about these proposed tax reforms that's got, people, especially the youth, out onto the streets when they have previously been uninterested in government affairs?
Elizabeth, I think there are a number of things that have gotten the youth interested in this particular finance bill. The first thing is the fact that there was unfinished business in the finance bill from last year. When the conversation was being held on the finance bill last year, a good number of them did not understand what the fuss was about, and they thought that the protests that were held last year were a disturbance. But then after a few months, especially when some of those taxes came to force, then they started realizing that it was affecting them directly and affecting their parents' ability to give them a certain lifestyle. Of course, this year, this particular finance bill, 2024-2025, has also touched a very sensitive area. It has touched women, especially by using taxes on sanitary towels. It has attacked gender roles, especially on the use of diapers and the needs for women to access diapers. It has attacked unemployed youth who happened to be the target of His Excellency, the President's campaign in the last election that got him into power. And he kept on speaking to unemployed youth. He was calling them hustlers. He identified with them. He woke them up. Any political party in this world knows that you do not wake up this group when you do not have a plan for them. As soon as you wake them up, as soon as they know what they deserve and what their rights are, it becomes very difficult to settle them. And I think that's what has caused this kind of energy from Gen Z, this kind of energy from the millennials to actually find its way into the clamor for a better finance bill, at least this year.
Okay. I wonder if this bill can be made better for people. Nicholas Minde, Ms. Agara was talking about, the taxes on menstrual products for women and nappies, both of which have very recently been dropped. The proposed taxes on those things, the proposed taxes on bread has also been dropped because of the protests. So do you think that we could see the government roll back some of the other proposals? The fact that the taxes on, bread, menstrual products, nappies have been dropped, how much is it a victory for protesters, and can we see more?
It was a good thing that the pressure actually yielded to some of those amendments, especially this proposed 16% VAT on a product that was previously zero rate. This is bread and gluten. And of course, the previous tax, there was also a recommendation on 2.5% on motor vehicles, which was then again dropped. And of course, also the financial services, which include, the daily lives of people who are transacting with the M-Pesa, which is, digital monies and all that. It was a good thing that the government almost listened. But again, if you look at the proposed bill, the finances, as Stella has mentioned as well as my colleague Reginald has mentioned, it still covers to a great extent these salaried employees and taxing these unemployed youth who really rely on digital content creation and all that. So as where we have so far reached in terms of the second reading of the bill, you find that maybe it would have been more pressure is needed, but the government is still intent on passing this particular bill, because as the government has also mentioned, if this bill is actually shut down, it will also be seen as being having no confidence on the government, because this bill is also directly tied to the budget process of 2024-2025. So that therefore is the dilemma for this for the bill and the protesters at large.
And Mr. Kadzutu, could we see increased taxes on other goods or in fact new items to replace the levies that have been scrapped over the last few days? I mean, one of the criticisms of this Kenyan government is that the items that are taxed keep changing all the time. Again, this time we're talking specifically about proposals, but in a broader context, that the items that are taxed are constantly being changed.
I think there's uncertainty that comes with the fiscal policy in Kenya, not even just for the Ruto regime only, but even for the previous regimes, where every tax year there are new tax proposals, causes a lot of problems for the economy in general, especially going forward, because then you cannot plan long term. So, for example, you have infrastructure bonds which were tax exempt. Now they are proposing or putting withholding tax. In anyone who's holding that infrastructure bond is already thinking, I was supposed to get 16% tax-free. Now 20% of that is going to go to withholding tax. They were planning on raising 354 billion on these new tax proposals. So one thing they've done after they've dropped all the other things that they managed to drop, they increased road levy by 39% to around 25 shillings per litre. And now the ripple effects of increasing the price of petroleum products of fuel is that transport costs will go up, electricity costs will go up, food costs will go up, because the transport of the cost of transporting food from the farm to the shop, from the factory to the shop has gone up with that road levy. So they have to find another way of raising that 354 billion, unless then they do cuts on the appropriation bill and reduce expenditure by the equivalent amount of money. I don't think they'll take something else. They'll most probably either add it to borrowing, and Kenya remains in the same or deeper.
Yeah, absolutely, because one of the reasons why Kenya is in this situation is because of the borrowing. Ms. Agara, if you look at the protests, one of the reasons why demonstrators are saying they're out on the streets is because of corruption in the government. And while the government is raising taxes, they're not adequately addressing the corruption that also affects the revenues that go towards government spending. How much of a problem would you say corruption is at the moment, and is the government doing enough about it?
Corruption is a huge problem in Kenya. I don't think this is anything that we need to belabor for anyone, because many people have had the many reports on corruption that have come out of Kenya. The biggest challenge that we're having with this government is that there's an increase in runaway corruption. With the coming into office of the president, he managed to get very many people who had active cases in court pardoned and getting away with very small fines for some of their corruption cases. His government has also had several scandals linked to corruption that are going to be impacting on the lives of Kenyan citizens, because that's money lost from the economy that will never be recovered. Kenyans happen to have a very vibrant media that keeps on informing them about these forms of corruption, and they follow the cases on a daily basis because Kenya is very politically active. So it puts us in a situation where the citizen understands what is being lost from the economy, and then they're also listening to the president, trying to convince them through his government that they need more resources to be able to run our country. Unfortunately, the feeling is that the amount of debt that they're incurring for this country is not being invested in the right area, and therefore doesn't make sense. But maybe let me add, Elizabeth, that even as this debt is being collected, it's supposed to be coming in for service delivery or coming in areas that are going to be making money for the economy. Unfortunately, they are investing in recurrent expenditure. They are wasting a lot of it in corruption. And when this is happening, they're imposing taxes on Kenyans that are going to increase the life of Kenyans. Reginald has spoken about some of the areas where they've increased taxes that may still affect people in the bill as it is now. Yeah. For example, the import levies. Kenya depends heavily on imports. I think the average from the records from 2021 is about 20 million USD worth of imports, which is about 2 billion Kenya shillings. I mean, you cannot cause an economy that depends on imports to pay extra taxes on imports, yet that cost is going to be transferred to the consumer eventually.
Yeah,
so it is a big problem.
Okay, and you raised a lot of important points there, including, mismanagement. Mr. Minde, we've talked about, China is Kenya's largest lender, and the debt that, Kenya's debt to GDP ratio, I think, is around 70%. Many of the Chinese built and funded infrastructure projects are underutilized or haven't paid for themselves, as Kenya said they would. Just how much of a problem is mismanagement?
Well, there is a lot. If you look at the external, the budget that was raised, $31 billion for the year 2022, 2024, 2025, and not just about corruption. There is also money that are being directed to things that are not very essential in terms of, for example, repairs of homes or payment of the spouses of this president and the deputy president, which again has really angered many Kenyans. So as much as we're talking about corruption, there's also misappropriation of money being directed elsewhere. But back to your question on China, there's a lot of concern about the growing budget crisis. And of course, if you look at the way the budget was actually structured, it's also about to deal with this external borrowing is a way to really offset the burgeoning external debt, which again is also a big problem, because we see there's also a lot of angst amongst Kenyans, especially there's belief that maybe this particular finance bill has actually been drafted by external actors, especially the IMF, who are directly involved in terms of these financial institutions. So there is that particular worry amongst the Kenyans.
Let me put that worry to Mr. Katsutu. Is it warranted? How involved, is the International Monetary Fund? How much oversight do they have in the Kenyan government setting its monetary policy and in these proposals?
Well, they're effectively a receiver or an administrator. When a company is about to liquidate, you get an administrator or a receiver to manage the affairs. The point where Kenya was a point where they needed the IMF or they were going to default. Some of the policies that have come from the IMF, as noble as they are, because IMF as an administrator or a receiver have to show the creditors that Kenya has the ability to pay. And the only way you have an ability to pay, like if you, Elizabeth, go to a bank to get a loan, they ask you for your payslip. Now, the payslip of a government is the amount of taxes that they are able to raise. I think the Kenyan government should not have chest thumped when they got into power, saying that we will not default, we will pay, but they should have put their tails in between their legs and sat down with the creditors and said, how can we sort this out? For example, in this finance bill, or in the budget for this year, 1.8 trillion is going to debt repayment of finance of a budget of around 4 trillion. So literally half your budget is going to either redeeming debt or paying interest. So IMF had to come in, and for them to give you the money which Kenya has been using and give the Kenyan government the credibility that they can be able to access the international markets, because they had been frozen out and they needed to show that IMF is in charge, IMF is helping. But if every review that IMF has been doing and the program that Kenya is on expires next year around March, one thing that the Kenyan government has been missing is the revenue targets that have been set by the IMF. But I think those proposals are a bit of a disconnect with the reality and the economic structure on the ground and the demographics on the ground. And they need to find another way of raising revenue to be able to repay domestic and external debt.
Ms. Agara, what could that other way be?
The other way, number one, is for the Kenyan government to listen to the Kenyan citizens more than they listen to the Bretton Woods institutions. Indeed, they have an obligation to repay debt, but then they need to first of all listen to the Kenyan citizens, because it is the Kenyan citizens who are generating these resources that are going to use to pay for the debt, and then of course the direct investments. Number two is to make sure that there's more money in the hands of citizens. No economy has ever grown from taxing its people. Economies grow from having disposable income in the pockets of citizens. Disposable income that could be used to start businesses is used to trade, and therefore provides the resources that are needed for the government to tax. Increasing taxes in a space where citizens do not even have money to spend does not provide the kind of resources that then they're expecting to get their targets from. Number three is debt responsibility. Why are we repaying debt that has not been audited? We've never had a debt audit in Kenya. Nobody knows what they're repaying. They're also not giving us feedback to say this is what the debt that we took has paid for. Instead, Kenyans are constantly reminded that we're paying debt that is not covered. The last thing I will say on this is about ensuring that there's tax justice on this matter. When you are collecting taxes progressively, there's also supposed to be progressive spending of taxes. Corruption cannot be seen to be happening in a space where they're collecting these kinds of taxes. If they impose austerity measures on Kenyans, then they should also be seen to be exercising austerity on themselves and not investing on budgets for people who are not even within the constitution supposed to be given budgets from the tax of the including the chief minister.
Okay, thank you for that. We only have a few minutes left in the program, and I'd like to cover a couple of very important points that we haven't yet. Mr. Minde, there are other African countries that are spending an even larger portion of their revenues on paying back debt at the moment. How will they be looking at what's happening in Kenya at the moment?
Interestingly, actually, if you look at the East African region, a country like Tanzania is also big. If you look at the budget, that also rate simultaneously with the Kenyan one. A big chunk of that money also goes into debt repayment. And of course, they'll be looking with a lot of interest to what is happening in Kenya. Just yesterday, we saw the IMF extend another loan to Tanzania. So I think the government will also be very much worried in terms of what is actually happening.
Okay. And
Kenya. If you look at...
Okay, Mr. Kadzutu, there's so many reasons to be hopeful for Kenya, isn't there? There is the GDP growth, there's the young educated population, there's the use of green energy, it's online. What is it going to take at this point to realize that hope and potential and not squander it?
I think the first thing that the government of Kenya has to agree is that they actually do not have the capacity to repay this debt. And the first thing to do is to plug the hole that is making the debt continue to grow. That means overspending, looking at your expenditure versus your revenue, and not your fiscal deficit, which uses GDP as an indicator, because you can always inflate GDP and say our deficit is reducing, it's now 2% of GDP. But look at the difference between revenue and expenditure. For the last 6-7 years, the difference between revenue and expenditure has been around 40%. That means you're spending 40% more than you are collecting in revenue. And that now piles up to where they are right now. So unless they can reduce that deficit and say we're going to live within our means for now, there's no point of improving roads at the expense of where we are now. There's no point of building expressways. I know they want to build an expressway all the way to Mombasa, completely unnecessary. So if they can plug that leaking hole in their revenue right now for a couple of years, it might be painful, but it will get them out of the situation that they are currently in, and also start making sure that the taxes and the fiscal policies and the budget are going to areas that grow our export ability, increase incomes in the hands of the population. If they're able to do policies that do those two things and at the same time plug the hole, then the true Kenyan story will come out.
Yeah, so a lot of agreement there with Ms. Agara on how to fix this problem. Ms. Agara, just lastly, you know, what is at stake for Kenya here, given, again, everything, all of the positive things that are happening in the country, and also the fact, you know, that it is a stable country in a pretty unstable region?
First of all, let me register here that Kenya is still going to be a going concern even after this finance bill conversation. Kenya is still going to be functioning as a country even after this finance bill conversation. However, things will never be the same again, especially because Gen Z and the group of young people from the millennials who have found themselves in this clamor have tasted blood. They now know that what it means to be on the streets fighting for their own rights. They have also heard from their parents saying that they've handed over to them to get the dream that we have constantly had for Kenya. They are very aware that the Bretton Woods institutions, including the IMF and World Bank, run a capitalist agenda that they are not interested in being a part of. And they're telling the government, we understand that we have an obligation, but as you negotiate with them, could you also check to see that the people you're trying to get these resources from are going to survive? They're also very aware that there are certain sectors that need to grow, including manufacturing that had zero-rated areas that are now going to be taxed. They are aware that there are certain agricultural components that are now going to be taxed. Unfortunately, they are also aware that there are taxes on phones and laptops that will affect their businesses they have. So in terms of the future, one of the things that the government of Kenya should wait for is that these people are not going to rest until something happens. I personally think that it is extremely important that we start preparing for unexpected action from citizens and maybe even an authorization from citizens, because this is something that is coming in the near future.
Ms. Agara, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you to all of our guests. That is Stella Agara in Nairobi, Reginald Katsutu in London, and Nicholas Minde also in Nairobi. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the entire team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.
Selling bombs to Israel. Stop sending weapons to Israel. Get out of the war industry. Focus on keeping your plane safe for commercial airlines. Commercial. Get in your lane. Focus on commercial. Stop fueling the genocide in Gaza. Bombs are killing children in Gaza. Stop it. Stop sending weapons to Israel. Make us safe at home with your commercial planes. Focus on making safe commercial jets. Not killing innocent civilians with their bombs. People over profit, always people over profit. Stop the genocide. Stop sending weapons to Israel. Make safe plans for commercial flights. Get your priorities straight, Boeing. People over profit. Whistleblowers are right. Killing kids with your weapons is wrong. Stop sending weapons to Israel. Because you cared more about the conflict.
You cannot destroy 340 people. You destroy somebody's flesh as you build the ark of flesh. People never have the chance to see on the husband. Just what will you do with your Republican? Give us the answer.
Stop putting profit over people. You want to know how to lie. You want to know what you did.
I'm not thinking of the 6 minutes of my father's last breath on the blade. 6 minutes stitching out for me. Next time, hold their hands. How about you? Boeing and the CEO who let that happen. And yet, nobody was there.
This hearing of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation will come to order. We welcome our witnesses and my colleagues. And I would like to welcome in particular some of the members of the audience who are here today. Michael Stumo, Nadia Milleran, Adnan Stumo. They're the parents and brother of Samia Rose Stumo. If you want to stand, you're welcome to with your photographs. Also here are Chris Moore, Clarice Moore, and David Moore, the parents and brother of Danielle Moore. Zipporah Curia is here today. She's the daughter of Joseph Curia. Catherine Bertay, she is the mother of Camille Bertay. Abadu Amiha is also here. His wife, Sarah Gabre Michael, was the cabin supervisor on Ethiopia Flight 302. We remember them and the other 341 victims of the unspeakable tragedies that occurred when
Hello traders, and thanks for tuning in to this week's Market Outlook from Access. I'm Michael Stark, Financial Content Leader at Access, and in this video I'm going to be giving a possible idea for trading the US dollar against Japanese yen this week. But before that, let's look back at the performance of last week's idea. Last week, the idea was a possible sell for gold against the US dollar from around $2,305 with a possible target around $2,260. So far, that idea has been unsuccessful, but it's possible that it might be triggered again in the future. So we'll keep monitoring that throughout the week. And for this week, the idea is a potential buy for dollar yen. We can see that dollar yen has been in a very strong and ongoing uptrend for a number of months, and in fact several years. And currently the price is moving around 158, and it'd be possible to see it increase to 159 as initial target. Well, after that, it might even be possible to see 160 or even higher than that. The main issue with this is that the price is currently overbought, so it might not be an immediate continuation upward, and it also depends somewhat on data. The primary narratives that are driving the possible move upward by dollar yen are economic conditions and divergence in monetary policy. For monetary policy, the Bank of Japan's rate is significantly lower than that of the Fed and likely to remain that way for at least several months and probably years, even if there is a hike by the BOJ in July. Meanwhile, growth in the USA, although it's slowed down, remains relatively strong considering expectations at the start of the year, although Japan currently has shown a decline in GDP for the previous quarter. Critical factors to be watched this week if traders were to take the position are Japanese balance of trade, and on Thursday evening GMT, Japanese inflation is the key release. In summary, the idea for this week is potential buy for dollar yen with a possible target around 159. Main narratives driving the possible movement upward by dollar yen are divergence in monetary policy and economic conditions in the two countries, and the critical factor to be watched this week is Japanese inflation. Please remember that this is just an idea for trade. It's not a guarantee of success. It's not a signal. You always need to manage risk and do your own research.
two airlines crashed in 2018, 2019. I also want to recognize the family of John Barnett, his mother, Vicky Stokes, and brother Rodney Barnett, a Boeing whistleblower who committed suicide under the immense pressure that the company put on him for raising safety claims. They are with us today. To all of you, thank you for having the strength and courage to be with us. And we are deeply sorry for your losses. I wanted to begin by introducing you because the issues before us today have real human consequences, life and death results, not just abstract numbers and hypotheticals, abstract issues. They are a matter of life and death for people who travel by air or work for Boeing, And this hearing is a moment of reckoning. It is about a company, once an iconic company known for engineering excellence and product prowess, that somehow lost its way. 5 years ago, 346 innocent people lost their lives in not one, but two preventable tragedies. We learned those tragedies were caused by intentional decisions to put production speed over safety and profits, stock price over people. In the wake of those tragedies, Boeing promised to turn itself around. Planes were grounded, executives were dismissed, promises were made. What we've seen since from whistleblowers is that, in fact, the manufacturing issues, the retaliation against whistleblowers, non-conforming parts, quality inspections skipped, and issues concealed from the FAA, evidence hidden, all have continued. And there is mounting evidence that the deferred prosecution agreement concluded in 2021 with the United States Department of Justice has been violated. In fact, there is near overwhelming evidence, in my view as a former prosecutor, that prosecution should be pursued. When you were named as Boeing's chief executive, Mr. Calhoun, we were told that you were the right person to correct course, and you committed to, quote, strengthen Boeing's safety culture and rebuild trust with our customers, regulators, suppliers, and the flying public. And for a while, some sort of believed that Boeing might have changed. But then this past January, the facade literally blew off the hollow shell that had been Boeing's promises to the world. And once that chasm was exposed, we learned that there was virtually no bottom to the void that lay below. PSI started this investigation after current Boeing quality engineer Sam Salapur came forward to disclose alleged shortcuts in the production of 787 and 777 aircraft that could pose catastrophic safety risks over time, fastening of the fuselage to other parts. Mr. Salapur courageously recounted how he was isolated and transferred for refusing to stay silent about his concerns. Our investigation has proceeded since we first heard from him, and we have heard from many others. We have more than a dozen whistleblowers by this point, and we encourage more to come forward. We've collected that evidence. We've learned that Boeing's problems go deeper than one whistleblower or one incident or one line of aircraft. A mechanic in South Carolina told us about how when he and his colleagues raised concerns about directives to not follow policies and procedures, quote, we were ordered to just do it and told there were hundreds of others waiting in line outside the gate wanting our jobs. Another whistleblower from Washington State has brought us new evidence very recently. A Boeing employee, Sam Mohawk, quality assurance inspector in Renton, Washington, informed us that Boeing is improperly documenting, I'm quoting, non-conforming parts, possibly using them and installing them in airplanes. There are parts that are damaged or specification. He said he's been told by his superiors to conceal this evidence from the FAA and that he's being retaliated against. In fact, he's been threatened with termination. These are chilling allegations. They echo concerns raised by others like John Barnett, who made similar claims about practices at Boeing 787 manufacturing plant in South Airline by Merle Myers, who came forward last month with additional related claims about a different plant in Washington. This new evidence is detailed in a memorandum that I shared with my colleagues, PSI members, earlier today. Without objection, I'd like to ask that this memorandum be entered into the record. Mr. Calhoun, you were brought in to the company as CEO. You had been on the board from this company around. You and your board of directors have a duty to your shareholders, but they will be deeply you have a duty to demand the highest safety standards and insist that every installation is properly documented and ensure that speak up means, in fact, speak up, not shut up, as it is meant all too often. Boeing needs to stop thinking about the next earning call and start thinking about the next generation. We're here because we want Boeing to succeed. Boeing needs to succeed for the sake of the jobs it provides, for the sake of local economies it supports, for the sake of the American public, and traveling public, sake of our military. It's not enough for Boeing to shrug its shoulders and say, well, mistakes happen. This is not an industry where it's okay to cut corners. It's okay to rush planes out the door because you need to meet a quarterly sales target. I feel you know all of what I am saying, but it's not enough to say it. Boeing has to do it. Boeing has to live it. In a country where air travel literally was invented with the ingenuity and exceptional American engineers of Boeing, where still the best workforce in the world in the aviation industry continues to come to work every day and do its best, there's absolutely no reason where we should not be the home of the preeminent airplane manufacturer in the world. Boeing is making some leadership changes, but they look more like managed musical chairs, moving the same people to different roles within the company, people who may have been responsible and should be held accountable. The Department of Justice will conclude its investigation and make its independent decision about whether to prosecute. But for Boeing, regardless of that decision, it is a moment of reckoning and an opportunity to change a broken safety culture. With that, I turn to the ranking member.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, to avoid repeating much what you said, I'll just ask my written opening statement be entered in the record. Well, I start out by offering my condolences to the family members and loved ones of those who were lost in the 737 crashes, the people in the audience here. I think those condolences are universal and shared by everybody here. I'd like to underscore what the chairman said, is that this committee, everybody in this room, I would say everybody in America wants Boeing and the airline industry to succeed. It's just crucial that they do so. From a manufacturing background myself, supplying plastic packaging materials to the medical device industry, I understand quality systems. I also understand the difficult nature sometimes in meeting specifications. I understand the difficult nature in today's world of hiring people in a manufacturing setting. And I read a recent article that's becoming more and more challenging for the airline industry as well. So there are many contributing factors to what has happened. And from my standpoint, the subcommittee's role is to highlight as many of those factors as possible, get everybody focusing on them, keeping pressure on the entire system. I mean, that's the other point I want to make is there are many people. It's not just Boeing's CEO. It's not just Boeing's management team. The quality system that needs to provide assurance to the traveling public that it's safe to fly. And that's, in the end, that's what we want. I mean, I travel multiple times a week, almost exclusively on 737s. I have to admit, I get on those planes feeling pretty confident because I know of all the people involved, the suppliers, the manufacturing works, the multiple layers of management within Boeing. Certainly FAA plays a major role. I mean, I'm not a fan of big government, but we need government to do certain things. And one of them is the FAA doing its job of regulating the airline industry, the airline manufacturers to make sure that they have a perfect record. That's what we're talking about. You need perfection. And that's hard to achieve. The airlines themselves are huge participants in this, and I'm highly disappointed. I've spoken to airline CEOs, your customers, and I'm disappointed that they haven't been willing to come before Congress, primarily to offer assurance to the traveling public that they have their maintenance systems in place. They have quality systems. They're checking and double checking the aircraft multiple times a day. And of course, the final quality control step is, and quality control personnel are the flight crew, the pilots. And personally, I would never travel on an autonomous plane. I don't care how good you have your quality systems. I want to make sure that I've got a pilot and a flight crew on that plane with me, making sure that it's safe as best as we possibly can. So again, I think it's necessary that we hold these hearings. I wish the airlines would come in and explain their quality systems, their maintenance systems, again, with the whole goal of assuring the public that it's safe to fly today and in the future, and that they've got what problems exist, and there are obviously problems. They've got them in hand, and they're doing everything they can to fix those problems. So again, appreciate the hearing. Mr. Calhoun, thanks for coming here. You'll be asked some tough questions here. I appreciate the phone conversation we had, and you know what you're in here for. So I appreciate you coming here. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Just to assure you, we are hopeful that will